What if there was one thing that was responsible for 80% of all of your success? Podcast Growth Nation, today for episode number 167, a simple principle you need to learn to be more successful. Right now, things are going really well in business and we're crushing it and there's so much going on and I'm overwhelmed and I can barely keep up. But this time last year, we were going through a different type of overwhelm. I'll never forget, Alan and I sat down and we said, look, we're doing way too much stuff. We're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this. And honestly, we are doing none of it well. What would we go out of business without? So at that time, I think our business had like 25 departments, and a lot of those were like future departments. Retreats. We've never done a retreat. We're not doing a retreat anytime soon. Why are we putting conscious effort, time, and focus into that? So we sat down and we said, what are the things that this business would go out of business without? And then we got to work on cleaning up those things. And I think we went from 25 to like 7. So we cut it by whatever that is. Let's just say 60%, 70%. And we got really, really, really specific and we simplified a ton. And since then, the business has grown a bunch and we've gotten way more opportunities and we've gotten way more clarity and we're able to be way more focused. And it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that we've talked about this a lot, but I want to approach it from a different perspective today. It's very easy to lose sight of the fact that one thing is always going to matter more than other things. And we get to a place where we think all things matter equally, and they don't. And they almost never will, to a degree, right? There's levels and there's layers to that. We're not going to get super deep into that today. But what I want to talk about is something called the Pareto Principle. Back in whatever year it was, there evidently was a gentleman named Wilfredo Pareto. That's a tough name. But he was a pea farmer, or he just planted peas. I'm not sure. But what he realized was that 20% of the pea crops gave him 80% of the pea yield. So 20% of the plants produced 80% of the peas. Interesting. That is a principle that goes across a lot of different things. So most likely 20% of the people in your country make 80% of the wealth. 20% of the people who drink probably drink 80% of the alcohol. If you go through the stats, this is fairly common across industries, across demographics, across psychographics. But it's the same with success. So 20% of your efforts will create 80% of your results. We have to figure out what that 20% actually is. And I was thinking before this episode, what is the 20%? What is the 20% that brought us 80%? And I'm going to get into that because I'm not 100% sure that it's as external as you might think. I think it might be different things, but we'll do external and internal. Even from our perspective, 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of our clients, most likely. And 80% of our revenue comes from very specific pieces of our business. I think that's a very common misconception that everything you do is going to matter the same and you should put the same amount of time, effort, energy, focus, money into those things. So from an internal perspective, I believe the 20% that got us 80% of the results was being really good interviewers. Now, when I look back, it's garbage and I don't think I'm that good at all. But evidently at the time, we were pretty good because we got a lot of opportunities and we got invited to be on lives all the time and be on big guests podcast as coaching clients. So we must have been doing something right. That 20% brought us 80% of our results because people felt that we were reliable. They knew we would show up. They knew we would be prepped and they knew we would be focused on bringing value. So from an internal thing, that's 20% that brought us 80% of the results. From an external, and this is something we messed up, and that's why I talk about it so often, for you not to mess up, because please do not make the same mistakes I've made. I don't want that for you. The 20% effort that brought us 80% of the results from an external perspective with our podcast was getting to know our audience. Every single day, having that as a habit, reach out to somebody and connect with somebody in quote unquote Next Level Nation. That was it. That was the thing. And when we stopped doing it, it was noticeable. Now, this is where it gets challenging. Well, what about getting guests? No, I mean, that was not as important as connecting with the audience. What about increasing your tech? No, that's going to happen anyway. And you're going to have to do that multiple times as a podcaster, but that's most likely not going to be the thing that gives you a giant bump. It doesn't really do it. It's more the principle of, if you have an hour to invest in something, what are you going to get the best return on? So yeah, we could do an hour interview with a really big guest, and that could work really well. But I'm telling you, putting an hour into finding, connecting, and adding value with our audience was the best use of time ever, even though it didn't seem like it. And that's why this is so hard, because you don't always know right away. Sometimes you know in reflection. But that is my question for you, because this is what's happening right now. People are doing episodes. So this is what I've seen across the board. Going on Podmatch, going on Matchmaker, you're getting overwhelmed with messages from people who want to come on the podcast. Your schedule's booked. You're doing whatever. Maybe you're doing one a week in terms of recordings, but you might be doing 5 recordings a week. You got a big backlog. You're out for 6 months before you get released. No worries. There's nothing wrong with that. You do your episode. You throw it into Opus Clip. You have StreamYard do its magic clips. You have Riverside do its magic clips. You post that on social media. You tag the guest. You send a follow-up email, but whatever. Cool. What of those things, what are you doing really, really, really well at? I'm not saying you're not doing great at interview. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is most people are not at the place where they found leverage yet. They have not found the thing that they can invest 20% of their time in to get 80% results. For you, it's most likely going to be connecting with your audience for sure. This is a really good example. I have a client who I would venture to guess 80% of their results in coaching has come from the 20% activity of doing free calls. I would bet a large sum of money on that. That 20% of their time that goes to free calls brings 80% of the opportunity. And it's not always cut and dry 20% time. Just think of it as energy, think of it as effort, think of it as focus. All right, think of it that way. And this is one of the reasons why podcasting is such an important, valuable opportunity, because you can theoretically record a 30-minute episode that can touch thousands of people. So that is what we're talking about here. That's how you leverage your time. But in the beginning, when you don't have that big of an audience yet, which is completely normal and totally expected, we have to figure out what's going to move the needle the most. Guest research. Most people aren't doing it. I'm telling you, that is a really good place to invest some time. And that does not seem like it matters, and it does not seem like it's going to deliver a reward, but it will in ways that you can't see yet. Getting to know your audience, that will always be a valuable use of your time. Always, 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 always. If you said, would you rather me create social media clips or get to know my audience? I would say get to know your audience 10 times out of 10. Obviously, both if you can, but if you can only pick one, get to know your audience. Get to know your audience. Get to know your audience. And then you might say, well, how's the podcast going to grow if I don't do anything on social media? This is a common thing. You don't have to post a clip from the podcast on social media. You could literally pick your phone up. So after I do this episode, let's say I don't want to get a clip of this. I could literally sit in the spot right after I finish this and say what I said at the top. What if there was one thing that was responsible for 80% of all of your podcast results? I just recorded an episode on the Pareto Principle. Boom, 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 boom. It drops on this date. Check it out. That hook, story, lesson, future pace, call to action. That's what you do.
Next Level University and Kevin is exactly where you need to be if you're a podcaster. When I first started out just a few months ago, I had no clue on the direction I was going. I was getting hustled by another company that was giving me not even close to the value that Kevin and Next Level U was giving me. They literally changed the trajectory of my podcast, have helped me out tremendously. They understand the clients. I promise you, you will not go wrong with dealing with Kevin and Next Level You. I'll see you there.
That doesn't require you repurposing any content. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the best way and the only way to do it. I'm not saying that. But there are only so many units of time. And essentially what we're trying to talk about today is what is the best, most valuable use of your time today? And when will that stop being the best, most valuable use of your time? I don't know if that's ever the case. I'm still at a place where I aspire to talk to community members. I aspire to talk to other podcasters. I aspire to talk to people in my space. That's still one of the most valuable uses of my time, still to this day. I have a bunch of podcast breakthrough sessions booked next week. That is a very valuable use of my time, always. What isn't a valuable use of my time might be, okay, this is an example. We thought that speeches were going to be one of the most valuable uses of our time. In retrospect, they were good for mastery and getting good at speaking, but almost nothing of note came downstream from those speeches. We got paid to speak, which is great. So money was great. But could I tell you that we had people reach out and they became pillars in our community? That didn't really happen. Did clients come from that? Yes, but less than you'd think, for sure. A smaller percentage than you'd think. We ended up getting team members, people that came on the team from speeches, so that's a win. But it's just different than I thought. We do not put that much conscious effort into getting speeches anymore. It just isn't the most valuable use of our time. We do put a lot of time into getting on podcasts because that is a very valid use of our time. So that's the conversation that we're having today. So a couple things I want to touch on here. We're talking about the Pareto Principle, which is the 80-20 rule for productivity. All right, how do I get more done in the same amount of effort? I'm not going to say less time. I'm going to say, how do I get more done in the same amount of effort? Okay? There's also an 80-20 rule for content. So the 80-20 rule for content is you do 80% what you know works and 20% creativity. That. Too many of us end up getting stuck in the same cycle over and over and over and over again, and we don't change anything. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody, because as things have gotten busier, I've had less time to do the creative stuff. And we're shifting that so I'll have more time to do it. But it's been way more 95-5. 95% do the thing that you know, and then 5% test when you get a chance. I like 80-20. I think 80-20 is a really good place to live there. So for you, when it comes to content, 80-20. 80% tried and true. You know it works. You know it's based in the fundamentals. 20% try something different. Try something different and see what happens. I've been doing more golfing lately on the weekends, and I aspire to be able to do content on the course. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to bring my full setup or anything, but I think that could be a unique perspective. Let me test that out on social media and see what happens. It's not super relatable, me doing content from this office every day. People get sick of it. People like fun, unique experiences. They like uncertainty. They like variety, right? There's very little variety in my life. Let me capture when that happens. So that's a test. But I know the podcast is always going to be a thing. That's going to be the 80%. That's always going to happen. That's always going to be there. But the way I do it might be different. The intro might be different. The hooks might be different. All of that. And then there's another 80-20 rule for consistency. So do 80%, I won't say low-hanging fruit. I'll say 80% certainty and 20% uncertainty. 80% of your guests can come from Podmatch. They can come from Matchmaker. Love it. 20% of your guests should be reach guests. DMing them on Instagram, DMing them on Facebook, LinkedIn, email, TikTok, whatever. Wherever you would find these people. 80% of the time, you can message people that you know is a high likelihood that they'll come on. That way you never miss. And then 20% of the time, message people that are stretch guests, because it's not just going to happen. Especially now, it's a different landscape. It's too easy to get on podcasts. So people are not necessarily, especially higher level guests, are not necessarily scrambling to get on podcasts because they have access to big podcasts. And they're doing the same exact thing. Okay, this is good. This is behind the scenes. If you've ever wondered why a guest said no or said, hey, I will come back when you have a bigger audience, they can go put that 20% effort somewhere else and get a bigger 80%. That's all it is. That's it. That's all it is. We don't have that privilege yet as hosts, potentially, right? So we have to take what we can get at times. So 80% certainty, 20% uncertainty. 80% I know this person will come on, 20% I'd really love to get this person on. That way we stay consistent. We are growing and evolving. We're always putting out content. We're as productive as we can be, and we're taking shots and we're testing out different stuff to see if it works. One of my clients is at a mastermind right now, and they sent me some stuff about all the changes that mastermind is teaching them. The reason these changes are taking place is because the host of this mastermind has been testing this out for thousands and thousands of times. 80% what you know works, 20% test. Boom, boom, rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. So it's really easy to get stuck in the scarcity of I don't want to change because what if change equals worse? I understand. And if you plan on doing this for a long period of time, you're going to look back on your stuff anyway and think it sucks probably. Unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news there. So that's part one. Part two, again, I love Podmatch. I love Matchmaker. But by definition, you're only going to get a certain level of guests from there. You know who isn't really on dating sites? Celebrities. They don't really have to be. They know people. They can connect with people. And if there is one of those, if there is a dating site that celebrities are on, it's probably a dating site for celebrities. It's a little bit different. They're playing a different game, right? I love Podmatch. I love Matchmaker. I think they're great. I think they're amazing. And I think they're really good foundational. They're in the 80% for sure. But you're most likely not going to get a very high-level guest from there. So that's got to be the 20% outside, right? That might bring you that 80% world-class stretch, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening guest. So that is my thesis in today's episode. If you think of everything from that perspective, so from a productivity perspective, where can I put 20% of my time that will deliver 80% of the effort? Okay, there are certain things. The podcast is one of them. If you stop the podcast, you lose all the results. That is a really good example of that. The podcast is the 20% that brings 80% for sure. But there are other things that do a similar thing. 80-20 rule for content. Do what works, do what you know works, test out different stuff. Because the only way to know whether or not something works is to test it out and then retest it. And then 80-20 rule for consistency. And specifically with guests or solo episodes. 80% accessible guests, 20% reach. And then if you're doing solo episodes, 80% episodes that are simple enough to record, and then 20% of episodes that you have to prep for more, or they're stretches for you, or they scare you, or they're outside your comfort zone, whatever it is. And there's a million different examples of 80-20. But those are the real three: productivity, content, consistency. I think if we focus there, we'll be in a really good spot. And if you've ever gotten to the place where you see a really big dip in downloads, I would ask, did you start doing something different, or did you stop doing something you used to do all the time? Those are two really good places to start. Seasons happen. You're going to get dips. You're going to get highs. You're going to get lows, right? But we have to focus on what we can control. Is there anything else? One of the things, and again, I'm not saying not to do this, but one of the things I see so often is people are doing everything at like a level 5. Can 3 things and then give those points to the things that make the most difference. I can't tell you how many mailing lists I get put on without asking, by the way, or accepting it, they're just not, it's not going to do anything in the short run. And it's not going to help everything else grow in the long run because it's not done intentionally. If you're 1 year in, 2 years in, and you have like 50 people that are listening to each episode, 25 to 50 people, I would invest more time in getting to know your audience and less time in that type of stuff. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. If you have all the time in the world, do it all. But there are not equal levels of value in the stuff that you're going to do. There just isn't. This is more valuable than me doing an Instagram Live. It is. I have a potential for a bigger reach here. It's more on brand. It makes sense. This is the 20% that brings me 80% of the results. All right, cool. All right, if you're trying to figure out, I'll say it one last time, the 20% that brings you 80% of the results, I'll have my link in the show notes below for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. We have another round of the Next Level Podcast Accelerator starting in a month, I believe. So we'll have the link in the show notes for that. We literally had somebody who is going through the Next Level Podcast Accelerator. He was at Podcast Movement, and he said, I'm learning so much more from this than I learned at Podcast Movement. I was like, dang, cool. That's exactly what I like to hear. So if you're looking to get the habits, get the mindset, get the strategy, get the tactics, get the awareness to be able to grow, scale, and monetize your podcast, that is exactly what the Next Level Podcast Accelerator is. And I can give you a discount code. It is NLU Listener, because we talk about it more on Next Level University. NLU Listener at checkout, and it will literally take 30% off the price. So it ends up being like $24 per call. I'm telling you, there is not a more affordable / valuable coaching program for podcasters out there. I do not believe it. So we'll have the link in the show notes for that. And then obviously we always have the Facebook group. Posts in there every day. I'm going to try to be in there more. Maybe I'm going to do lives in there. I'm going to rework some stuff. We're going through kind of a rebrand and a re-strategize. So expect to see my face in there more. Okay. I hope you are investing your time well, because you do not get time back. And if you're investing it well, I am willing to bet you will be more successful. If you are just throwing stuff at the wall, hoping it sticks all the time, it's time to dial that in. Let's do what we know works most of the time, and let's test out stuff with the remaining time. As always, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all next week.